My name is Angela Parker. I'm a final year journalism student, and our class is supposed to go make a documentary film in the nearby jungle. The teacher divided us into 5 teams, and each one of us had to come up with an excellent and unique idea. We would be assigned marks based on the final version of our films. Each team was to explore different parts of the jungle and choose a topic for their film. 2 teachers for each team were also assigned for our teams, who were supposed to overlook our projects and for our safety. Jonathan, Carlos, Grace, Sammy, Martha, Kevin, Mr. Joan, and Mr. Andrew were on my team, and we were assigned the south area for our documentary film. We were supposed to spend 7 days here to collect the materials, and after we finished filming, another 2 days would be given to us for editing and finishing up the final versions of our documentaries. The topic we chose was the decreasing wildlife. It was about the animals who were dying and the number of wild animals decreasing by the cutting of forests by humans, and about the animals that are leaving their habitats. I know looking at the topic we had chosen, the time we were given was very less, but we were determined to win the top marks for this documentary. Anyway, our team set off for the destination a day prior as others did as well. It was because reaching the forest would also take up a day of our time, and so we were granted permission to leave early. Everyone had brought whatever materials were needed for the documentary, and the trip included food, tents, water, and other things as well. We reached it after a long 9 hours of driving, which was exhausting in itself. As we entered the jungle, it felt unusually hot and dry in there. Maybe I felt it because of the sudden change in my surrounding and atmosphere. So we went ahead and set up tents to rest for a few hours before starting our work. "Don't you feel a weird, unusual stir among small animals?" Kevin said in a worried tone. "Where did you even spot small animals? Even I did not see one yet," Carlos asked in a sarcastic tone, which made the rest of them laugh, except for me, because Kevin was right. I saw on my way that the birds were acting strange. "I think we should head back," Sammy suggested. "And why would we do that?" Martha asked in a rude tone. "I think Sammy is right. The weather and the way animals are reacting. Something is wrong here." As I said that, the rest of them turned and looked at the teachers, hoping they would say something. The 2 teachers looked at us in confusion for a few moments, and then Mr. Andrew said, "No one is going anywhere, and we will be proceeding with the documentary film first thing in the morning." "Yes, kids, Mr. Andrew is right. So go on and eat your dinner and go to sleep, because from tomorrow, you might not get it," Mr. Joan added and walked to his tent. "Bullshit, let's just go, team," Jonathan, who was the leader of our team, said, walked away. I knew that he was also sensing the danger looking at the surrounding, but we had no other choice but to follow the order teachers gave us. After having dinner, we went to our tents, and everyone prepared to sleep. That was when we heard Mr. Andrews scream, who went to pee 10 minutes ago. Everyone rushed in the direction of screams, only to find him get torn apart limb from limb by 2 tigers, who seemed like they were fighting over him, thinking of him as food. We did not dare to go anywhere near them to try and save Mr. Andrew, so we ran to our tent. That is when we heard more tigers approaching us, so we changed our direction to the car and immediately got in and locked the doors. "Where's Martha?" I noticed her missing, so I asked worryingly. "I don't know, maybe she's in the other car." As Sammy said, a tiger jumped on the front of our car and started to attack it. It looked like he was set on destroying the car and taking us out. And then 2 more tigers appeared. "At this rate, they're going to break their way into the car." Carlos's voice was trembling while saying this. At the same moment, we heard Martha scream coming from the direction where our tents were. I suppose she was trying to hide there when we ran toward the car. "We gotta do something," I said in a weak voice. "What are we supposed to do? These tigers are surrounding us." It was Sammy, and she was right. We did not have a chance to think of saving anyone other than ourselves. The tigers stopped attacking the car, and they started to walk in circles around us. After half an hour or so, they stopped, and sat near the car and kept looking in our direction. "Let's just start the car and get out of this place," Carlos whispered to us. "But none of us know how to drive a car, and even if we did, our stuff is back in our tents. We can't just leave without them," Sammy replied. "What is more important to you, your stuff or your life?" Carlos said in frustration. Carlos is right. "Sam, we gotta get out of here somehow." "But Carlos, Sam is also right. None of us know how to drive." I looked at him and said this in a concerned voice. "About that, I know how to drive. I just said I didn't because I did not want to drive for 10 hours all the way here," Carlos said while trying to hide his gaze from us. We all agreed to his plan, and then he started the car. From the voice of the engine starting, the Tigers got up, and as they charged towards us, Carlos drove the car away from them. I turned my head to see if others were safe, and saw the other car also followed behind as Tigers chased them as well. After about 15 or 20 minutes, they stopped chasing us, and we managed to get out of the jungle within an hour or so. When we were sure that we were out of danger, we stopped the car and waited for Jonathan's car. They were 10 minutes behind us, and the moment they caught up, we noticed that there were only 3 people in the car: Jonathan, Mr. Joan, and Grace. "Where's Kevin?" Sammy asked with a trembling voice when she did not see her boyfriend. "I'm sorry, Sam, but we couldn't risk our lives with Kevin," Mr. Jones said. Sammy broke down and started bawling her eyes out, while Grace explained that he tried to sneak to the tents when the Tigers were calm, but they drove off, leaving him the moment they heard Tigers getting up again. We drove back to the town, and no one spoke a word the entire way back. The only sounds were of the wind and the sniffling Sammy. After another 10 hours, and we entered the town border, Carlos dropped each one of us off to our houses, and then left for his own. The next day in college, we were called to the director's office, who informed us that we were not the only ones who faced that situation. 2 students from another team had returned with similar news. A few days later, we got the news that a fire had broken out in the jungle, and fire departments were trying to put it out. I guess since the other animals went in hiding or ran away, the Tigers must have been hungry, and that must be the reason they attacked us. What was even more surprising to me was that while we were trying to save our lives, Jonathan managed to record the entire attack and submitted the film for our documentary. I don't know why, but this made me feel sick and horrified, but changed the name of the topic to Predators. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. This incident happened when I was visiting West Bengal, which is a state in one of the South Asian countries, India. Being new to this place and English being my first language, I couldn't understand what most of the folks there were saying, and nor were they able to understand me. There were a few young people who knew how to speak English, but my southern accent was not that much of a help. So when I was talking to this young guy, I don't know what part of my speech or accent went wrong on his ears while asking about the most flaunted regions of the state, but he looked a bit shocked as if he wasn't expecting that from me. I remembered being in Darjeeling at the time, which was a beauty all on its own. Despite being a guy who travels to a lot of different countries, I had never seen such a breathtaking scenery before. I don't mean to offend anybody, each country has its uniqueness, but those who have been there before would be able to understand what I'm trying to say here. Anyway, when the guy gave me directions of what seemed to be a hill situation, I figured he may have misgotten what I had asked him. Instead of taking me a taxi or any other mode of transportation, I decided to hike to the place. I was confident that I'd be able to withstand the journey. It took me about 8 hours to reach there, and when I did, I was met with a young-looking guy wearing a white shirt and gray pants. He introduced himself as Raj and asked me if I needed a guide since he was one. After walking straight for 7 hours and 45 minutes, my confidence had taken a bit of a toll, so I decided to give him a chance and accepted him as my guide. There were a few problems with understanding his pure Indian accent, but he seemed fluent in the language itself, so it was better to have someone like him alongside me if I needed to engage in a conversation with another Indian. I was thirsty and hungry. He also started to take me over my senses, so I told him that he would move forward after I quench my thirst and fill my belly. He nodded in response and went off to somewhere where I took a nice spot to eat whatever I had bought up. I took out potato-stuffed thick tortillas that I bought earlier and started eating them. Felt too spicy for my taste, but I still loved the combination of flavors mixed in this. I took out one of the bottled waters and emptied its content in my stomach. When I was done eating, I rested a bit before walking any further. About a half hour later, Raj came back and asked if I wanted to look around. I was still tired, but since I didn't want to waste the young boy's time any more than I had, I got up and started following. He started walking me into the woods and telling me about many historic things about the place that I found quite interesting. As we were walking further, I couldn't help but take notice that I hadn't seen a single soul besides this guy ever since I stepped foot there, so I asked him why there weren't people around the area. It's because they're scared to come this time around. I felt the wind being weird as he said that, along with his pace getting slower, but thinking it was just my imagination, I asked him, "What's so scary?" There wasn't any response from Raj's side. Even his footsteps had disappeared, which only gave my heart a sinking thump along with a tightness in my chest. I didn't dare turn around, but I had to in case I was wrong, so I hesitantly turned, only to see there was no one there, and Raj had suddenly disappeared into thin air. The woods were pitch black, and the only thing I had was my phone's flashlight since Raj was the one carrying essential stuff. Started calling out his name while saying that if it was some kind of prank, it wasn't the slightest bit funny. But there was no response. Not knowing what to do and where I was, I started to run in whatever direction when I felt someone following me. Thinking it must be Raj, I turned around, only to find an old woman in Indian attire. I thought she must be one of the locals and might know which direction leads out of the woods, so I started asking her questions. I tried to speak as slowly as possible for her to understand me, but when she said in response shook me even more since I knew for a fact that the language she spoke was neither Hindi nor this state's local, because I have heard many of those languages and I haven't heard a single person speaking in the dialect she used. She then gave me a blood-curdling smile, which terrified me to my core, and I started running in the opposite direction of her. Luckily, I was able to run out of the woods and stumble across the same guy who told me about Dow Hill this morning. But as I was too spooked to be able to speak a word, he went ahead and started speaking in his slow Indian accent. Even though I told you about this place since you asked me about a haunted area, but I couldn't sleep worrying about you, so I came. This isn't the kind of haunted place you could come to like this. I was too scared to correct him that I never asked for a haunted one in the first place, and this was all because of a simple misunderstanding. But still, I silently followed him. He had brought a taxi with him, which was parked in a distance. He then took me to his home as a guest and insisted that I stay the night. His family was too nice. They offered me multiple different dishes to eat, and each one had an entirely different flavor. Even though I had a little spooky experience, the love this family showed me weighed more. "Arav, you know about the guides who work here?" I asked the next morning as I was exiting his house. "Yeah, a few of my friends work there, so I know almost everyone," he said with a cheerful smile. "One of the guides whom I met yesterday disappeared all of a sudden. His name was Raj." I gave him the description of what he looked like, but he looked at me with the same expression he gave the other day I met him and said, "I don't believe someone like that works there. I'd have to ask my friend if he is someone."
Growing up, my favorite thing in the world was going fishing with my two older brothers. We lived in a very rural area and would often hike out into the woods to go to various creeks to go fishing. We never really caught anything big in the creeks, but it wasn't as much about what we caught as much as it was about spending time with your brothers fishing. Stereotypically, we always got up way early in the morning on fishing day. We would begin hiking out to whichever creek we were going to and would watch the sun as it stole across the sky. It would be fully light outside as we got to where we were headed to. The scariest thing to ever happen on a fishing trip, of course, happened the first time that we had gotten to a new creek. We had set out that morning, determined to go further into the hills than we normally did. We passed by one or two of our regular fishing spots and kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. We found an absolutely amazing spot. It was thickly wooded, but the creek was huge. It was beautiful and even had a fallen tree stretched out over it. After we determined that it was sturdy enough, the three of us made our way over to the other side of the creek. We sat our stuff out and began to fish. The day wore on, and we weren't really catching anything. The fishing got boring after a bit, so we decided to do something we normally didn't do. Like I said, the creek was huge and it was quite deep too, so we decided to put aside our fishing poles and go swimming in the creek. I really don't know how long we had been swimming when I noticed that our middle brother stopped doing anything and began staring off in the woods. Our oldest brother asked him what was wrong, and he just motioned to the woods. "There's someone out in the woods, watching us," he said. My first thought was that some pervert was out there watching us, but when I followed my brother's finger pointing out towards the woods, those thoughts quickly evaporated. Standing off in the trees was a huge man. It wasn't too dark that we couldn't make out some of his features. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, which struck me as odd as it was pretty warm out. He had a baseball cap on his head that was sitting low over his face. But the most striking feature he had was that he was holding what looked to be a rifle or shotgun in his hand. We weren't sure what to do. Going into the woods, we knew that we were trespassing. We never actually knew whose property we were on, but we did know that the places that we hiked and fished on didn't belong to us. Except up until this point, we had never gotten caught before. Both of us younger boys looked at our brother for instruction as to what to do. He seemed just as worried as we did, though, and didn't give us any direction. He just kept looking at the man standing there and watched. My brother suggested we try and get ourselves over to our stuff, take it, and leave. However, this was daunting because that was the side of the creek the guy was on. We slowly made our way over to our things. However, before we got to shore, an old hag came running out of the woods, shrieking like a freaking banshee. I got startled and fell back into the water, struggling until my middle brother pulled me back up again. The old nasty woman actually ran over to our things, our poles, and our clothes. She started grabbing the things and screaming, "Mine, mine, mine, mine!" She was gathering all of our things in her arms, dropping a few of them when she had too much in her arms. "Yay, stop that!" my oldest brother yelled, and began to try and move faster to the shore. My middle brother reached out and put his hand on his shoulder and pointed back to the big guy in the woods. When we moved back towards the shore, he began moving closer, and he held the gun up as he walked. "Holy shit!" I distinctly remember yelling. "We're sorry we trespassed on your property," my middle brother shouted, but they didn't pay any attention to us. "He's not gonna shoot us," my oldest brother said, and began moving towards the old hag to get his things. As he did, though, the old woman saw him, and she took a fillet knife out of her pocket and started waving it at my brother. "I'll cut you," she screamed at him, her arms still overflowing with our things. By now the big hillbilly was by the shore of the creek, and he had the shotgun cocked and was pointing it at my oldest brother. He, of course, stopped in his tracks. It was a tense moment as we stood, cold in the water with this guy pointing his gun right in our faces. Once the woman had gathered up our clothes and fishing gear in her hands, the guy said one thing to us: "Get." We didn't have to be told twice. All three of us swam to the other side of the creek, got out of the water, and got out of there. It sucks because we had to walk through the woods in nothing but soaked shorts. We didn't even have shoes, and the twigs and rocks and leaves hurt our feet. But we were too scared to even consider going back. We fortunately did not get chewed out for losing our stuff. Our dad told us that there are some messed up people out in the woods, and we had to be careful. It was a long time, though, before we were brave enough to go fishing again. This had to have happened sometime in the early 2000s. My husband was still spending most of the time on the road working for one of the major insurance companies. As a result of this, myself and our young daughter spent the majority of our days alone. A few years prior, we had purchased a new home on a somewhat isolated piece of land, and the journey between town and home could often be harrowing, especially at times of heavy rain. Most of the last 5 miles of the road that led to the house was nothing more than loose gravel and wasn't very wide for that matter. My daughter and I found ourselves stuck on this section of road on a really bad night. I did all that I could to keep our old Subaru on the road, but the rain made visibility almost impossible. It wasn't long until I misjudged one curve and ended up in the ditch. Fortunately, my husband had the foresight to sign us up to one of those roadside assistant programs. I contacted them and was told that the weather was keeping them busy, but they would get to us as soon as possible. Not knowing how long we'd be stuck there, I made my daughter as comfortable as I could and waited. The rain stopped soon after, and I was now able to see how far away from home we were. I estimated it was about 2.5 miles to the house and considered walking, until remembering no one was at home to retrieve the car later. Help was on its way, so I could wait. Within 10 minutes of the accident, I could see the headlights of a truck coming towards us and began to get excited. However, it didn't turn out to be a tow truck. Instead, it was an older man driving a rusty pickup. When he saw the car, he slowed down and looked into it as he passed. I thought he was about to offer to pull us out, but he continued down the road. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but 5 minutes later, the rusty truck approached us coming from the other direction at a very slow speed. He stared at me once again as he passed, even making eye contact with me briefly, but didn't stop. Things were beginning to look odd, but I thought maybe he was lost and turning around to return to the highway. He wasn't obligated to help. Perhaps he thought I was parked instead of stuck. He probably wasn't from around there and was just trying to get home like I was. Things didn't start to get scary until I noticed the same truck coming toward us for a third time. It had gotten completely dark by this point, and most women I know feel much less safe once the sun goes down. This situation made things even more sketchy. He did his usual by now slow drive-by. What was different this time was that he stopped the truck after he passed and did a quick 3-point turn in the road. He was now facing us again, stopped about 10 yards away. Rather than get out and come over to offer aid, he sat in the cab and watched for a few minutes. Only now did he open the door and begin to get out of the truck. Almost as soon as his foot hit the pavement, a pair of headlights appeared from the other direction. The man stayed where he was, just watching and waiting for a minute before it was close enough to see it was a tow truck. Once he saw this, he jumped back in his cab and made a quick U-turn and sped away from us. My heart was stuck in my throat as I watched this play out, and not until I could read the name of the company on the side of the tow truck could I begin to relax. The tow truck driver didn't hesitate to pull his truck in front of us and hook up to my car. I was finally confident he was there to help, and I got out to thank him. He had us out of the ditch in a few minutes, and we were on our way. For the remainder of the journey, I kept my eyes open for the rusty truck, and even as I drove up our drive, I feared I'd see him lying in wait for me. He was not, thankfully, and I got my daughter into the house for the night. When my husband returned from his latest trip, I told him about what had happened during the last storm, but I left out the part with the strange truck. I knew it would only make him more stressed when he was away, and at that time, he had no other choice but to continue his trips. Because of this latest trouble, he went out and purchased an almost new Jeep with a 4x4 transmission for me. I was over the moon to get it, and I never got stuck again, even on the muddy parts of our property. It didn't take long for the stranger in the rusty truck to pass from my mind. However, for the next 2 weeks, I caught myself looking for it any time I was on that stretch of road. I had almost completely forgotten about that incident until just recently, when I saw a truck similar to it at the store. It, of course, was not the same one, but it caused it all to come flooding back and motivated me to write this. Fortunately, in the preceding years since then, the county has paved and widened the roads, and my wonderful husband gets to come home to us every night.